my clock, it's 11:30, so we're going to begin to get started unless someone tells me to stop. This is Scott Zients on behalf of the Central Ohio NIAP chapter. Thank you for joining us for this special members-only presentation, Central Ohio CRE Getting Back to Work. Our president, Rafe Webster, couldn't be with us today, so I'm just giving a few opening remarks. First, we're trying to provide a lot of value to our members during this COVID-19 time. Keep an eye out for additional programs. You can always check out our website, centralohionap.org. On June 3rd, we're going to have a presentation on the Ohio Site Improvement Program. July 8th, tentatively, will be a lending program, also focused on COVID-19 and how that's influencing the lending markets. August 12th, tentatively, we have an onshoring and reshoring program that will describe, again, how COVID-19 might impact our supply chains in onshoring and reshoring. And then tentatively, September 9th, will be focused on changes in the office environments as a result of COVID-19. So again, please keep your eye out. If you have ideas, email us. We'd love to hear from you. Next, before I introduce Don, also check out what NAIOP National is doing. We're focused on providing a lot of value for our members most significantly through June 1st. There's a whole series of programs that are free for members. Great downloadable courses, things like advanced real estate finance, basic real estate finance, the current industrial economy. Great sessions. Check them out, load them, download them, and again, it's free. These are $800 plus value to members through June 1st. They're also doing a webinar series, and they're active on Capitol Hill. Most recently, in one of the COVID-19 bills, they got a tax fix enacted that really has a positive impact on commercial real estate. So with those introductory remarks out of the way, I'm going to turn the panel over to Don DePero, CEO of the Columbus Chamber. Thanks, Don. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's great to be with all of you. Thanks so much to NAIOP and your Central Ohio Chamber for inviting me in to moderate this panel discussion. And you know, you're tired of hearing it, that it's a different world we're living in these days, but it certainly is, and it's kind of weird of me sitting in my man cave right now moderating this panel on behalf of NAIOP and Getting Back to Work. I'd like to just thank all of you for your support of your Columbus Chamber of Commerce, and feel free to go to columbus.org. We have opened our website to members and non-members alike. We have all types of information on combating COVID-19 and getting back to work, and many resources, including all of the applications for all the disaster relief loans from the Small Business Administration, the PPP plan, and everything else. So let's go ahead and introduce our esteemed panel. We have Rick Carfagna. Rick is representative from District 68 with our Ohio House of Representatives. Welcome, Rick. Sheila Nolan Gartland is a partner at Voorhees, Sater, Seymour, and Peace, and Sheila specializes, of course, in commercial real estate activities, including acquisition. She also has experience in the energy industry, and Sheila just shared with us that she's on Voorhees COVID committee for all of the work that they're doing. And Skip Weiler. Skip, of course, is the president of the Robert Weiler Company, which is involved in all types of commercial real estate activities. And without further ado, we'll jump right in. I do want to mention at the bottom of the bar, all of you at the bottom, you can hover over that and you could see Q&A. You could submit your questions for our panel. I'm going to keep my box open. And although we have plenty of questions already prepared, what we'll do is just weave in your questions as you feel fit to submit them. So let's jump in. And our first question is for all three panelists. Sheila, how about we'll start with you. What are we hearing from our clients? You know, what are they saying? What are some of the biggest struggles we're hearing? Are there success stories? But in general, what are we hearing from our clients and customers? Sheila?
Sure, and thank you for NAP for having us and let us be involved in this. Our clients are calling, as you can imagine, like everyone else is, constantly, and we're talking about everything from the uncertainty of the situation we're in to dealing with the orders as they come out, the interpretation of the orders, compliance with the orders, if they're going to be enforced, how they're going to be enforced. As you mentioned earlier, we have at Voorhees, 40 of our 300 attorneys are working on our COVID-19 task force. And we're trying to follow all the changes, but it's a constantly changing environment. And we're following everything, not just commercial real estate and lending and landlord-tenant matters, but also labor and employment issues, healthcare matters, PPP and the CARES Act, SBA loans, employee benefits, and on and on. So we are fielding questions from every industry and all aspects of industry work, who can work, who can't work, and what's going on. So I think folks are right now trying to figure out, earlier it was if they were essential or not essential, and now as we ramp up to go back to work and start reopening, how do we reopen? What are those parameters?
Skip, how are your clients doing? What are you hearing from your tenants? You know, especially some of the retailers maybe who have shut down in the last month or so. What are you hearing?
Yeah, most people are freaking out, and me included, I guess. And so there's very few that are not. I have one client that sells cleaning supplies, and he is just, he needs to expand, but can't right now because he's too busy. But he's the only one I've got like that. Everybody else is freaking out. It really depends on the industry. You know, the hotels are just awful, restaurants, bars. The apartments aren't so bad, and everybody's saying, how are things going? But most of the apartments seem to be going okay in the industrial. I did have probably second, third day after they closed bars, I had one of my tenants call me. Actually called the manager first, and then I called him back. But he called my manager crying. He said he just had a baby. He can't pay the mortgage on his house, let alone pay us rent on the space. And so we talk about freaking out. And he's a great young guy. And he said, I went from decent to zero income. I have no money. I don't know what to do, of course. So all the restaurants and bars are in that same position. And unfortunately, they're not all Cameron Mitchell. But most people are pretty much freaking out.
Rick, how about your constituents? What are you hearing?
Sure. Well, what I'm hearing universally within the small business community, and this is across all the sectors, I mean, the number one thing right now to keep the doors open is cash flow. It's liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. And, you know, if you're lucky enough to score a PPP loan, you know, you're in decent enough shape. But for the others, you know, they need the 2 to 3 months worth of rent. They need the short-term capital to build back up their inventories or looking to make payroll for the core employees that they've managed to retain during this pandemic. But on the employee side, it's childcare, and that's a big catch-22. You know, Lieutenant Governor Husted has said that come next Thursday, the 21st, 92% of Ohio's economy is going to be reopened. But even if we get people off unemployment, I don't know how they return to work if the childcare options haven't been restored. I was on a call yesterday with a number of childcare private providers, and you know, normally they have ratios of 1 to 5 adult to children, 1 to 5 ratios for infants, 1 to 18 for school-age children. You know, the only ones that are operating right now are those that have a pandemic license serving essential employees, and they're having to do it with a 1 to 4 infant ratio or a 1 to 6 ratio for everyone else. So, you know, the ratios under which the providers are going to be able to reopen and operate are going to be really crucial to whether they can even if they can reopen. And then if they do, how long can they sustain with those cost margins? You know, there was a separate, you know, shifting gears real quick, there was a separate observation I heard yesterday from a consultant about what can we expect to see, you know, during this recovery period. I think, you know, first, an increase in fulfillment centers. We've seen a surge in online shopping. There's going to be a shift in the supply chain as you're going to see more and more items made in the U.S. where manufacturers can be closer to business. And I think we're going to continue to see a surge in data centers here in Central Ohio as, you know, work from home becomes much more the norm, and it necessitates more cloud-based services. You know, we have more than 120 data centers 50 of them here in Central Ohio. We know that New Albany is kind of the hub for those. But we're ideally suited for them. And while they don't supply many jobs, the construction of those projects can create around 1,000 or more jobs. And then once they're finished, you're going to need about 150 electricians, plumbers, and other workers to maintain operations. So that's what I'm seeing or hearing.
Thank you, Rick. Skip, you mentioned it. What are you doing for your tenants, especially those who, like you mentioned, the one young man, are really unable to pay their rent right now? And what's the outlook for various uses? And I know we're getting ahead a little bit, but retail, industrial, commercial, office, residential. And Sheila, I'm sure you'll have some input on this too. Skip?
Yeah. So it really depends on the tenant. Every tenant is different. And so we don't have across the board, here's our standard plan. We're really dealing with tenants on an individual basis. And that's pretty much what I hear across the board. Some tenants are in better positions, others aren't. For the bar guy I mentioned, well, what am I going to do? He can't pay anything. So I don't have a lot of choices at some point. And that's what I said, we'll figure this out. Let's see how much PPP money, which he did get some of that. So he used that to pay some of his rent. And so ideally what we'd like to do with tenants is say, here's the portion you can't pay. We'll amortize it over the balance of your lease. That's ideal. And a lot of restaurants and bars are reaching out trying to do that, who are able to do that. A lot of them are not able to do that. And you talk about industries, really it's the apartments aren't so bad. Apartments really haven't gotten hit too bad. In the higher end apartments are doing better than the lower end apartments. But the apartments seem to be okay, and the industrial so far seems to be okay. The worst are really the restaurant bars, because they went to zero, and the hotels. All the clients that own hotels, well, they went to zero too. So they haven't been able to pay mortgages. And so each tenant basically we work with and say, okay, what's your position? Where are you? How much term do we have left on your lease? Part of the issue is the restaurant, a lot of the tenants were barely able to pay your rent before when things were going great. And now when they have no business, we're saying, okay, when you open back up, we're going to increase your rent by whatever, 10% to amortize it. Well, they're saying, I couldn't afford it before when things are great. Now I'm opening up at 25%, 50%. How do I do that? And so I don't have any answers. We just say, well, let's figure it out. Let's work together. You really don't have a choice. And that's why I said to my bar guys, it's like, you know what, when all this is over, I get 6 months where you can't pay and I can't get you to pay more later, am I going to kick you out and then try to find somebody else to pay the same rent? Is that what I'm going to do? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. So my meal is I got to work with everybody and see what's your position, what can we do, what can you do, and just kind of try and slowly work through the process. So Sheila, I don't know if you've seen the same, what you've seen, if it's similar.
Right, and I say we're seeing the similar issues, that it's certainly fact-based between tenants and landlords. I think we can all go back to April 1, I think, when Governor DeWine requested, the 90-day suspension on rent and a moratorium on evictions, mostly I think in an effort to get landlords and tenants talking, and nothing was happening really quick. But I think it's fact dependent, and we're seeing deferrals of rent, abatements of rent, other concessions. But we're also making sure if a tenant comes up and says, I can't pay, I want a deferral or abatement, that it's COVID-19 related. Because we've had some, it's not COVID-19 related. They've been able to open. And so they just want an abatement of rent. There's always, not good guys out there. But I think also, in addition to what you mentioned, Skip, retail's been hit pretty hard as well. And we've seen a lot of retail tenants struggling. And it's just going to be working through it and see how long it lasts. And as you said, Skip, you can't really kick them out, because who are you going to get to put in there? So I think it's really a wait and see is what we're looking on. And then going forward, I think we're also talking about what provisions would we put in new leases? What are our provisions going to change now that can address pandemic or COVID-19 situations? And it's everything from force majeure clauses that everyone has been talking about to operating covenants and rent and co-tenancy issues, and even notice provisions. You know, can we use notice? Everyone's been filing notice as you do by regular mail or by overnight mail, and you send it, but no one's at the office to receive it. So under what circumstances and what details can be made that you could do an email type notice? So it's kind of
I haven't used force majeure so much. It's crazy. The
Great.
one thing on the tenants is that I have, of all our tenants, I have one that has not been responding and reaching out. And basically the tenants that'll work and communicate are the ones you'll work with. The tenants that hide from you are the ones you're not working with. I assume that's the same with you, Sheila.
Yes.
Sheila, have you been asked to represent any of your clients already in negotiations with your tenants? Because they maybe feel they don't have a good relationship with their landlord, or just maybe it's a different message because it's coming from an attorney instead of from the tenant themselves?
It's a mixed bag. Sometimes we'll get just a call saying, how do I talk with the landlord, or how do I talk with the tenant? But we haven't been diving into a lot of it. And I think that the tenant and landlords are doing a great job talking between themselves. And then, you know, on the domino effect, the tenant to the landlord to the lender, the landlords and lenders talking with each other as well. So the lenders can pull back if they need to.
Skip, are there any issues with multi-tenant buildings where, you know, you have different tenants, some are able to open, some are not able to open, and, you know, the PPE requirements, you know, some are probably better at maintaining the PPP requirements, and maybe others are not. Thank you for paying attention, Skip.
Yeah. You know, it's too early. It's too early to tell because we do have mixed use buildings, but people they haven't come back. The mask thing's just new. And at least from my side, it's like the restaurants and bars aren't open. And so the tenants up above want the restaurants and bars to open. Some of them are for takeout, but the bars aren't. But you're really not interacting. You don't have the retail open, the restaurant, nobody's inside the restaurant. So it's not like there are a lot of people walking around. So to me, we haven't had to deal with it yet. It's just too early.
We have seen it in other contexts, not necessarily in a mixed use or the multi-tenant building, but retailers employers and businesses who are trying to convince their employees they have to wear masks. I mean, the order says social distancing, you have to wear masks, and folks don't want to wear masks. And so we've been doing a lot of advising with employers on how to talk with your employees, and sort of like the landlord-tenant communication's key. Communication is key between employers and employees. There are exceptions where you don't have to wear masks if it's impractical to do so, if it's going to cause a danger in the industry, those type of things. But if they're going to have an exception to wearing a mask, employers, business owners need to make sure they have a written justification on why that particular employee is not wearing a mask. And it's the gambit. I mean, we've heard everything from no one wanted me to wear a mask now, and I've been working since the shutdown started. Now all of a sudden I have to wear a mask. Why do I have to do that? And I think employers just have to take the high road, because it's going to be ultimately the employer who's going to be in trouble if they're not complying with the order. So they need to make sure their employees are wearing masks. So I think those are the type of things that we're seeing for retail, which would spread over into a multi-tenant building. Just employers have to have a safe workplace and make sure they're doing what they need to do.
Rick, are you hearing it from any of your constituent small companies, small businesses on, you know, are they reaching out to you or to you via the governor's office or whatever and saying, you know, what do I do here? And I really need to reopen. Are some that really were not considered essential businesses now trying to make a case for being an essential business in an effort to reopen?
I'm hearing from all of it. I mean, it's quite frankly pretty overwhelming. I am on the Ohio House has it's called the Ohio 2020 Economic Recovery Task Force. I think we've met around 17 times. We usually meet, well, we slowed them down a bit, but they run about 90 minutes to 2 hours, but we just bring on kind of an endless parade of small business owners and organizations from across different sectors and all over the state. And, you know, because we really need to illustrate how is it impacting different sectors in different ways? I mean, you know, politicians love to throw around the term small business, but that's a pretty vague term, because you can't compare a small restaurant to a small fitness center to a small metal stamper. You know, the pandemic has hit them in very different ways. They're going to have different protocols in place to open up and inspire confidence in customers and employees. So, yes, I mean, I'm hearing from all over the state through those meetings, taking pretty copious notes, but I'm hearing within my own district, absolutely. And, you know, there's just so many different businesses. I mean, I heard from a small dance studio desperate to reopen. I've heard from some of the smaller indoor pools that are not recreation pools, but, you know, they teach toddlers how to swim. I mean, I could go on and on with different examples, but it's very frustrating, and it's depressing.
That's exactly what we're hearing from our 2,100 members. We have a 5-person, we're called member resource specialists. They're basically our account managers, and it just seems every situation is unique. You can't group these small businesses together because they all have different issues, and
Right.
you know, they have employees with pre-existing conditions and things of this nature.
But I think Don, just real quick, I mean, but that's kind of the point of us having all of these hearings. I mean, we're not doing it just to do it. We're doing it so that, you know, we're going to be creating a series of recovery bills. And I think it's really important that we calibrate these things specifically to the nuances of each of these individual business sectors, so that, you know, we're not just doing some one size fits all tax cut or, you know, something. I mean, that we're actually taking steps to address these sectors in very unique ways that are going to provide them some immediate help and mitigate the recovery periods.
Skip, it's so hard to look into your crystal ball right now because no one knows. None of us have lived through anything like this in our lifetime. But what do you think the prospect is for real estate deals? You know, and maybe you could look at the next 90 days, 6 months, a year, even 2 years from now. What do you think is going to happen out there?
You know, most of the time I run to my dad and ask him what's going to happen. He's been in the business a long time, so I always run to him for advice, and he's seen everything. This is the one time I run to him and he doesn't know. And he says, I've never seen anything like it. And which scares me because I feel like I know as much as him, which is probably the first time that's happened. So, but what I see happening is the world's definitely going to change. At some point, we're going to get through it, whether it's medication or a vaccine, we're going to get through it. The world's going to start to get back to normal. Now it's going to be a different normal. Office space, everybody's realizing we don't need all this office space. Some of our employees and people include, you know, bosses, whoever, have realized I'm just as efficient from home. I'd rather work from home. I'm involved with a bank who leased 20,000 square feet, moved into 10 about 5 years ago, has grown into 17. I just talked to them the other day. They said after this, they think they're only going to need about 12,000 square feet. So I see the future for office is going to be difficult because so many people realize we don't need offices. We can work from home. We're just as efficient. Same thing for retail. Retail is definitely going to change. Everybody's realized it wasn't a big change before the virus. More and more people were buying online. Retail was already struggling. That's why I was saying the Pennies and Macy's, they were already going under before when things were great. Now the world's changed. Now people like my dad have learned to buy things online. And so where all the young people were doing it, people in the middle were starting to do it, and the older people weren't. Well, now all the old people have. So now everybody's doing that. So I think retail is definitely going to change. And hotels, I don't know. I really don't know. I think people start to travel again. I think hotels will come back. If you travel, you got to stay somewhere, although the Airbnb things change that world a lot. The two industries I think are have a bright future are apartments and warehouse industrial distribution. You know, instead of buying at the store, you need to store all the stuff, and everything we order, you got to have a place for it. So I think the warehouse is going to be strong for the future. And I think apartments are going to be strong for the future because one thing you have to have is a place to live. And there's so many dollars out there with the pension funds, insurance companies. Well, where are they going to put that money? and the stock market is good, but it's like, if you look long-term, real estate has been the best investment. And so they want to have a lot of their dollars in real estate. And so I think going forward, they're going to say, well, where do we put our dollars? In apartments, in industrial, the distribution warehouse. I think they see that's long-term strong markets. And so I see a lot of dollars going there, which will keep the interest rates are so low, that'll keep the cap rates lower for that, which the prices are higher. So that'll inspire people like us to build more apartments and others to keep building more warehouses.
Sheila, are you hearing from clients who say, geez, I wish I had an out clause in my lease, or I wish I could renegotiate my lease? Are any of them talking to you about doing exactly that?
Right. Just echoing what Skip was saying, I think we're seeing the same thing, and there's kind of two different camps on. We've all learned how to work from home, something no one ever thought we could do. And it's working. And the question is, now as we look forward, and I wish we all had a crystal ball, because the uncertainty of not knowing 3 months or 6 months or 9 months from now what's happening. But as we look forward, lots of companies are being asked to cut expenses just because we don't know what's going on. And if you have leases coming up, I think that might be the first expense. If you can reduce your office space, you're also reducing staff needs and things like that, which is not good across the board. So other folks think that, as Skip said, we're going to see, quite a fall off on the demand for office space. But other folks are saying, it's great, we can do this work from home, but is it sustainable? Is it sustainable on this type of level, on that big playing field where we really will dump a lot of office space? So I don't, we don't know what's happening, but I know lots of folks are thinking about it and just trying to figure out which way to go. Then it would be, I think I read the other day, WeWork is just rethinking, how they're supposed to do all their spaces, especially with all the social distancing things. And even current leases and employers and landlords and tenants are trying to figure out how they can rework or reconfigure the space so they can meet social distancing needs, because we don't know how long those are going to be in place. It could be a very long time, Skip, as you mentioned, until there is the vaccine or something.
I was in a meeting recently with Mike Kaufman, the CEO of Cardinal Health, and Nick Akins, the CEO of American Electric Power, of course, two huge office users. And they said, both of them said, this has been a game changer for them, that they're rethinking everything we're doing. They said they're operating very successfully with literally thousands of people working remotely. I think Nick Akins said they had 11,500 people who would normally be in office space who were now working remotely. And it's got them thinking differently about their whole model and how they operate and how they will operate in the future. So it's, far-reaching ramifications. It's really been interesting. We already, Skip, talked about this a little bit and how you're dealing with rent deferrals or reductions. What are you hearing out there? Now, you said no two companies are alike, even if they're in the same industry. How will you approach this? I know it's common sense, but also you need to get your rent money too. You also need to get paid in order for the Weiler company to stay in business. So how do you think you're going to look at this? And do you see then maybe going into negotiations with a number of existing tenants to try to work things out moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. Each, like I said, it's on a case-by-case basis. We definitely are dealing with each one differently. And so we're kind of walking through it slowly. What a number of our partners and other people, our clients who own real estate, have said, well, why don't we just add it on to the back end of the lease? And so if we don't collect rent for 3 months or 6 months, we'll just add 3 or 6 months onto the back end, which I don't like. And sometimes you don't have choices. There's a lot of this I don't like. But that, basically, if you do that, that's just a rent abatement. I'm not collecting rent for the next 6 months. When the lease ends in 5 years or 10 years, well, the tenant's going to stay and keep paying rent, or I'm going to put somebody else in and get rent. So really, is all I'm doing is not collecting rent for that window. And the problem with that is the banks still want their payments. Now, the banks will defer payments, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about banks in a minute. They'll defer payments, but you still got to make the payments. And so if they defer them, they're not deferring the interest. So I still got to make that payment, whether it's now or later. And so having people not pay and add it on to the end is that's not the last thing I want, but that's probably the second to the last thing I want. My preference is, and we just negotiated a lease amendment with a restaurant in New Albany. And basically we said, okay, you have 10 years left. We're going to increase the rent. After we're holding the rent, he's not going to pay for the next 6 months. At the end of 6 months, he's going to start paying a little more. So at the end of 10 years, I'll end up whole, come out into the same place. It's going to take me 10 years to get there. So that's kind of, now each tenant's different. The bar guy I mentioned, we don't know what we're going to do with him. Like I said, he got some PPP money, so he has paid, but now he's already a month behind. He's not going to be able to pay next month's rent. So we're just going to have to see, okay, well, what's going to happen the next 2-3 months? Is there going to be another government program? And so we just kind of play it by ear and take each circumstance on their own.
Rick, you mentioned a dance studio that came to you and, kind of begging almost to reopen because, if they don't have any income, of course, they can't pay any bills either, personally or their business bills. Yeah. Are you hearing, more of that? Do you have other examples where, companies are saying, we need to get back at it or we can't pay our bills?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've already talked about the importance of cash flow. The message I'm getting at both the state and the local levels is the importance of deferrals when you can't provide outright forgiveness. I represent the eastern half of Delaware County. I have all of Knox County. And so I'm on 2 different respective local task forces for each of those counties, which helps me kind of keep my ear to the ground on what's happening. And I'll tell you, there really are a lot of great stories taking place about measures being crafted locally to help business. And I'll give you one example. City of Westerville, they already have their own municipal electric utility, and they have waived electricity, water, sewer, and refuse bills. That was for all of March's usage, and that was both residential and commercial. I think it cost them about $5.5 million. Delaware County is, I don't know if they finalized, but they're pursuing deference on commercial sewer fees. I think that's going to comprise around 10% of the overall system, so it shouldn't be a huge hit. They're working on pooling together funds to create a revolving loan fund program. They're hoping to get up to $5 million pulled together for that. But back to the original question, I mean, I think, well, one of the first measures that Delaware County sought to pursue is an extension of the property tax filing date from July 10th to August 20th. And that would be across the board. So the idea there being for businesses to take advantage of that opportunity cost of that escrow payment for 4 or 6 weeks, channel it back into your payrolls, pay your rent, utilities, build up your inventories. I was working with some of the others on the group to get some early buy-in from the locals. We needed to talk to the school districts, our townships, our cities, make sure that they had the carryover funds on hand to weather a disbursement that would be 6 weeks lighter in revenues. But our county auditor, George Keitza, he did send the paperwork over to the state tax commissioner about 2.5 weeks ago to get his consent. And I'm happy to report that on our call yesterday, they did receive word that the request was approved. So Delaware County at least should be announcing that any day, that at least will be bumping out that property tax filing deadline by 6 weeks.
Sheila, what advice are you giving to your clients? Sorry, Rick, to cut you off there. Sheila, what advice are you giving to your clients when you hear Skip and how they're negotiating and how they're dealing with their customers?
About the same deal, same terms as Skip. I mean, it is a case-by-case basis. It's all factual. And you just hope that everybody can work out the way they can work out. Because as we noted earlier, everybody has to pay somebody. And if you don't have your business working and you can't pay the landlord can't pay the lender, then we have to go backwards and ask for the lender to do a workout or forbearance or toll some payments from the landlord. And then the landlord can, hold payments from or make a deal for deferral or something with the tenant. And then perhaps the tenant will have more money in their pocket. But it's just, it's a vicious cycle, and we've seen it before. And it's just the question of, are we going to come out of this one sooner and faster than we did in the 07, 08? circumstances or what, but we've learned some lessons from there. It's just, if you're not able to operate your business and you're not able to earn an income, you can't break the cycle.
If there's any silver lining, I think one of the things was we were in such an incredibly robust economy before this all happened, and things were so strong. Maybe that will enable us to bounce back a little bit quicker, because in 08, 09, 10, there were so many different things that happened, you know, the recession and the real estate and 9/11, you know, coming out of that and everything. Skip, how are you doing working with lenders? Are you in regular conversations with some of your lenders? And, you know, if you're not going to get your rent paid, how are you going to in turn pay for your properties? How is that working out?
Yeah, you know, you talked about silver linings. The one thing is, thank God for low interest rates. You know, rates are so low, that makes a huge difference. And that, fortunately, that relieves some of the pain. And so not just with real estate loans, but the deficit and really everything, the whole economy. And so if we didn't have such low interest rates, that it would just exacerbate the problem so much. And so that part, that's the one good thing in this, is rates are so low. Our apartments can cash flow. We don't have to be at 96% to cash flow. We can be a lot lower and still be able to cash flow. The lenders it's all too new, I think. The lenders have not started forgiving debt, and they'll defer payments, and they'll say they say they want to work with you, but to me it's all too early, because we haven't seen a lot of distressed real estate go on the market. Everybody's waiting. You know, you can't do foreclosures, and you know, you couldn't do evictions, and so to me it's all too early to really know. The lenders seem sympathetic. They say, we understand, we'll work with you. That being said, they haven't waived interest. They'll defer your payments, but they're not waiving them. They're not waiving the interest payment. I think they'll restructure the amortization. They might let you go to interest only, which again, thank God for low interest rates. But otherwise, I think it's too new, where the banks have not started saying, we're going to waive payments or we're going to take discounts. And so now the banks have been extremely helpful with this PPP loans. Well, some more than others. I'm not going to name names, but there are some local banks have done a great job with that and helping me and our company and our clients in our tenants, which is huge. And so the banks want to help and want to be sympathetic, and really they have to. They don't have a choice. And when all this started, that's what I said to my clients is, they can't take everybody's property. That's why I said to the bar guy, they can't take your house, because if they take your house, they're going to be taking millions of other houses, and the banks don't want that. So we'll figure it out. We haven't figured it out yet. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't think the banks know yet. But so to me, it's just too early to know. But I think the banks have to be sympathetic and will be, but we just don't know how yet. I don't know if you have more insight on that, but that's kind of my take.
No, I think that the same is that I don't think the squeeze has happened yet. We all think it's been a long time. It's been 8-9 weeks, and we've seen certain things come in, and Rick's hearing it from the ground up, but it hasn't hit up everyone yet, because people did have a lot of capital still. It's different. But I think if this goes on and we don't get it back open, and we don't see, you know, some revenue coming in for the smaller businesses and businesses in general, that's when we're going to see the squeeze, and that's where the lenders will have to figure out what they're doing.
Rick, have any small businesses come to you and ask specifically, can government intervene on our behalf with our lenders, because they're maybe, you know, not being as reasonable as we hope they would be under these circumstances?
I've not necessarily heard that. I've not been asked for direct intervention. You know, something that does come up. You know, we hear people asking about, you know, their insurance, you know, the loss of business insurance. And I think that's kind of frankly, a dangerous argument to make. You know, they want to mandate coverage that frankly wasn't in the original contract for two reasons. One, it's likely unconstitutional. And secondly, it's probably going to bankrupt the insurance industry. And we know that Ohio is a really big insurance state. with their employee base. So I don't say that to be dismissive or callous to some of these economic losses, but I mean that's something I do get questions about, and it's something that's come up on our calls. But I've not had anyone just asking for direct intervention with any lenders. No.
I think the insurance industry is making it perfectly clear that they cannot cover these losses. That's not in the premiums that they've issued, and it would indeed put them all out of business. Let's stay right with you, Rick. Here, why don't you talk a little bit about Senate Bill 1 and
Sure.
The impacts to the commercial real estate industry?
Sure, Don. Well, I'll have to start from the beginning on that one and give you some background. So the Ohio Constitution gives the governor the authority to declare an emergency. But there's a section of Ohio Revised Code, and that's 3701.13, and that gives the state's health director some pretty broad powers of authority, which as it relates to the preservation of life and health of the people, and gives the director ultimate authority in matters of quarantine and isolation in terms of being able to declare and enforce both. And so that section of code originates from back in 1908. There was an outbreak of tuberculosis that actually spurred that law change. And there simply has never been a reason to look at it since then. But the federal courts have spoken. About 3 weeks ago, a judge ruled that the legislature has delegated this authority to Dr. Acton, and that it was a proper delegation. And this was in reaction to a lawsuit by a bridal shop who had challenged the health order closing non-essential businesses. So this was something that we caucused over last week extensively. Our Republican caucus, I'm a Republican, we control 61 of the 99 House seats. And there is a wide spectrum of opinion about the state of affairs. We have a very large number of members that are from primarily rural districts where they've been shielded from the impact of COVID-19, but their local economies are circling the drain. There is also a smaller handful of members like myself from suburban areas that have been hit harder from a hospitalization and a death standpoint by the pandemic. And candidly, I mean, I've been largely supportive of Governor DeWine and Dr. Acton's efforts to date. So, we had members on one hand that were calling for, frankly, some very draconian measures. We heard ideas they wanted to undo all of the orders and reopen everything with no restrictions, or they wanted to require legislative approval of every single order moving forward. And not only is that just logistically impossible, but frankly, I mean, I think it's irresponsible. But I voted in favor of Senate Bill 1 because I do think that it strikes a balance between allowing some legislative control, but it still yields to the expertise of the governor and the health director when these types of emergencies come up. So what Senate Bill 1, it does not undo or circumvent any of the health orders that have been issued, and that was important to me. And it does not prevent the health director from issuing any future orders. What it would do is prohibit any future order from being effective for more than 14 days, unless the Joint Committee on Agency Rule Review, that's known as JCAR, approves the extension. So JCAR is a 10-member panel. It's made up of 5 legislators, 5 from the House, 5 from the Senate. On each side, there's 3 majority party members, 2 minority party members. And their primary function is just that. It's to review proposed, new, amended, and rescinded rules from over 100 agencies. Excuse me. There's a couple of things worth mentioning. So it did pass the House, but it did not pass with a veto-proof majority. So it's entirely possible that the Senate may not even act on this legislation. It could be dead in the water. But if the Senate were to act on it and pass it, Governor DeWine has already said he would veto the bill. If it came to that, and if both chambers then had the votes and the will to override that veto, there is not an emergency clause, which means that the bill would take effect after 90 days. And that's 3 months further down the line, and hopefully we're in a much better place than today. So from my standpoint, it's my hope that this bill kind of puts to bed some of the more irresponsible proposals, I think, that were floating around out there. And it allows the Ohio House now to really focus its attention on crafting recovery measures. I mean, how does that impact the business community? Well, it remains to be seen if this thing is dead in the water, or if it goes anywhere. If it were to come to pass, again, it would limit future health orders to 14 days unless JCAR grants that extension. So, hopefully we're in a position where some of these orders just don't continue on indefinitely, and that there's at least some guideposts out there, and that the governor and the health director are giving data and justification to the legislature to perpetuate these things.
Sheila, do you have any comment on this at all?
We're just watching it to see what happens.
We have a question from the audience. Rob O'Neill. Hey, Rob. A question for Rick. Is there currently any legislative discussion about deferring the upcoming second half real estate taxes payable in June or July? Great question.
I'm not aware of any state legislation to that effect. Now, it doesn't mean that, there could be one of the 99 members that is, getting something drafted, working on it, but I've not heard of anything like that from leadership. We do have a series of work groups, very small work groups that have been put together to deal with different aspects of the recovery situation. Frankly, I think a lot of that deferral of tax payments is going to be dealt with at the local levels. Like I said, Delaware County is already pushing out their property tax filing deadline. And I would hope that more and more counties follow suit on that.
Rick, how's the state going to deal with the deficit? And, how will this affect us moving forward?
Yeah. Well, preliminary April 2020 GRF tax receipts were below the revenue estimates by around $866 million. And so that resulted in a fiscal year-to-date revenues of being below estimate by $776 million. So along that line, last week on May 7th, Governor DeWine did issue an executive order to implement cuts in the amounts of, and it was $300 million from K-12 funding across public, private, and charter schools, $210 million from Medicaid spending, and $110 million from college and university funding. And then not only that, all the state government agencies are getting their budgets cut, and that's going to hopefully pump up to $100 million more into combating that deficit, except for the Department of Corrections, which operates state prisons. I mean, unless we want to furlough a bunch of felons, I don't think anybody wants that. But the state, to put in perspective, so the state's total annual budget is $32.4 billion. And the vast majority of that goes to four categories. It goes to Medicaid, K through 12, higher ed, and corrections. And there's a saying in Ohio that we medicate, we educate, we medicate, and we incarcerate. We do have a state rainy day fund, and it's $2.7 billion. The governor has yet to dip into that, but the expectation is that that money is going to be needed further down the line as the revenues continue to lag. We did, as a legislature, grant the governor the ability to draw from that fund. That was in some legislation we passed early on in this crisis, but we have not, as a legislature, taken any formal action yet. I would expect to see some sort of a budget corrections type bill once we get into the fall. There has been some pushback on the House's part during some of the recent controlling board meetings against some of the continued agency spending, not necessarily against the merits of the projects or the programs, but kind of, protesting against the timing of some of those expenditures in light of the continued uncertainty. So, we're dealing with the deficit now internally as best that we can. And, it's unfortunate that we have to make those cuts. We haven't had to look at any sort of tax increases, revenue enhancements, anything like that yet. We have yet to dip into the rainy day fund, but, we've got a ways to go.
Rick, do you think there will be any incentives available from the state? Virtually everything PPP, disaster relief loans, forgivable disaster relief loans from the Small Business Administration. Do you think the state might come up with something for small business owners on its own?
Yeah, again, it's too early to tell. We had before the COVID crisis hit, we had a $2 billion capital budget that was going to be funded through state bonding that was working its way through the process. It kind of remains to be seen if we maybe pare that down or look to promote some of the projects in that capital budget that are going to stimulate construction. you know, that's always a possibility. I know the speaker has kind of wondered out loud about doing some bonding as some public works type projects as bonding as the stimulus project. So again, it's too early to tell. I do have a bill that I am getting worked through still. It's a residential broadband expansion program. I've been working on it for 4 years. But the governor has actually attached $20 million to that project. And that's designed, again, to get broadband infrastructure out to unserved areas of the state. That money is still alive. It has survived the cuts. I'm working on kind of shoring up some final revisions to the bill. And I'm hoping that we can keep that one moving as well. But, you know, lots of ideas floating around out there. There's talk about potentially a sales tax holiday. Maybe we can provide local governments with some flexibility on, say, TIF funds to, you know, open up some of those for some short-term uses. I've heard from the BIA. I mean, I know that's residential home builders, but, you know, talking about alleviating things like the permit to install backlog for, you know, wastewater collection systems. You know, that's one big thing that's holding up a lot of developments. Talking about maybe permitting the creation of things like a utility improvement district. And you would model that after, you know, the transportation improvement districts, where you can kind of pull together public and private dollars and kind of, you know, get projects done a lot sooner. So there are lots of ideas floating around and kind of being vetted behind the scenes. And again, I would just tell everyone to stay tuned.
Another question from the audience from Rick Craven. For you, Rick, it seems like businesses and government agencies have learned how to become more efficient. Do you think the government efficiencies that we've learned can become more permanent as we move forward? What have we learned through this, Rick, and what can we take with us moving forward?
Wow. Yeah, and I think it's the same thing you're seeing on the private side. I mean, we've had continuity of operations during this whole pandemic, you know, with work at home. And actually, before the governor's order even came down to do work from home, the speaker and the Senate president had already put those things in place for our staff. So, you know, my staffer had been working from home and, you know, able to log in and access his files. And, you know, we had a phone bank where we could take constituent calls and we really didn't miss a beat other than just we're working from home. And so there was nobody downtown here at the Rife Center. And that's not a bad thing. We gave early on the authority, or the ability rather, for local governments to have their meetings remotely. You know, whether they're doing it through a conference call or Facebook Live or, you know, a Zoom conference call. And, you know, we're seeing more and more, you know, these boards of county commissioners and these city councils and boards of township trustees, you know, they're having these types of remote meetings and they're able to preserve continuity of operations. So I think that's all a really good progression in embracing technology and efficiencies. You know, I think some of the lessons that we're learning, I mean, certainly on the JFS side with unemployment compensation, and, you know, you can't dump 500,000 to 1 million people on unemployment overnight and have a system in place to manage all of that. That's been really tough and it's been frustrating. So I think, you know, kind of shoring up some of those processes moving forward to be able to take some of those spillover calls and the call volumes. You know, I've been a big proponent of blockchain technology. You know, our banks and our lenders are using it for financial types of transactions, but I think, you know, we should embrace that type of distributed ledger technology, because if we're going to be working from home and dealing with sensitive data, you know, I think blockchain is something that's going to kind of revolutionize computer technology, and it's going to provide more transparency on those types of transactions, and it's also going to keep them more secure as well. So I think you're going to see a lot more embracing technology moving forward and applying it to governmental processes.
Skip, what has the Robert Weiler Company learned through all of this? And how do you think things will change for your company, for the industry moving forward?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not, to me, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I wish I did. I don't know. I just know it's going to be a different world. Our company's been focused a lot on apartments and land. And the one thing with land development is it's a long-term type thing. So if you buy and develop land, you expect to live and survive through cycles. And so fortunately I'm in a family who's done that and understands that. And so I think for our family, we know this is a long-term thing. We know it cycles. That's why I say every time you're in bad times, you think the bad times are never going to end. Every time things are great, you think the great times are never going to end. A buddy of mine always says, trees don't grow to the sky when things are good. And he's right. At some point, it's going to cycle. This is going to cycle, and we're going to be in good times again. And when we're in those good times, everybody will forget and think the bad times won't come. And so for our company, fortunately, I have great mentors. I know it's like, wait, just ride out the cycle, live through it. Things will get back to normal. The normal is going to change. Kind of our big focus for our company is land development and apartments are the two major things we do. And to me, fortunately, I'm lucky so many ways, but our company's lucky in that those are the two things we're focused on. So we'll continue to develop land. We'll live through cycles. We'll get through this cycle, and hopefully get through multiple other cycles. And then with apartments, there's always a need for apartments, and especially with the last wave of 08, when everybody, with the foreclosures and the housing bust, more and more people, especially the millennials, are realizing we want apartments. We don't want houses. And the one thing, there's a lot of doom and gloom, but really we are very lucky in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, the whole world has got troubles and the whole world's going to be down. But as communities get better, Columbus is so well positioned, being the state capital, having one of the largest colleges in the country. Also, you talk about colleges in the country. Well, downtown with Columbus State, CCAD, Franklin, well, that's just as big as Ohio State. And we're not a big industrial manufacturing community. And so all those things are positioned to come back well, not to mention we got great politicians from Rick Garfagna all the way down to the governor. We got great politicians who really have done a great job. And so the masses believe that. I'm not just saying it, but that's definitely true. We got great community. We got great people in the community. We got great companies. Voorhees has been a great law firm, and we've been using them for so many things. Well, now people need them even more to get through this, and not to mention the best chamber in the world. So I would say the one thing is long-term, Columbus is best positioned. We're going to all get through this. Columbus is going to get through it best, and we're going to be the best city in the country, just like we were before all this.
Sheila, what are your thoughts?
I think agreeing with Rick and Skip, of course, and I think we've been so reactive in all our thoughts recently that we can start being proactive and start thinking about changes we will consider making, or how to, for example, if we're going to have a excess office space, how can we convert some of those buildings? What are we going to do next? What are we going to do with lending and the relationships between the landlords and the tenants, and lending and getting small folks and small businesses back up and running, and kind of just work proactively. So if we find ourselves in this position again, which may not be during our lifetimes, but some other time, that we'll have something set in place that will be better prepared. So we're just going to look forward and hope for the best.
I don't see any more questions from our audience. I do have a couple more questions prepared, but we are at an hour. Scott and Debbie Lee, how are we doing? Do we have a couple more minutes, or at an hour, should we begin to wrap things up?
I think we can continue to go for a few minutes, as long as the panelists would like. And by the way, now that I have the microphone, I forgot to thank the programming committee. So we had Sean Goodwin and his committee did a fantastic job, and thank you to them for putting this on. Debbie Lee, do you have anything?
Yeah, thank you. And I think we could go another maybe 10 minutes. I know NAAP has some other meetings scheduled on this webinar page. So.
Thank you. 10 minutes it is. Rick, how is the state dealing with the limitations of liability for businesses getting ready to reopen? I know we've put together an internal committee within our 21 associates at the chamber, as well as an external committee to advise our members. But this is a critical question. I mean, what happens if someone gets sick once we reopen? Yeah. And although it's almost impossible to determine whether they got sick in the confines of their place of work or at home or when they were at the supermarket or whatever.
Yeah.
How is the state dealing with that?
So I mentioned earlier that we have the House leadership's put together a number of small work groups to try to tackle some different segments of the economy and come up with some recovery strategies. One of those is headed up by our majority leader, and that's Representative Bill Seitz from the Cincinnati area, and that's handling torts and immunity. Now, those efforts are mainly focused right now in the healthcare realm, where the thought is to grant medical providers, including nursing homes, with complete immunity related to the treatment or non-treatment of COVID-19 patients, unless there's what's known as willful or wanton misconduct, which is a higher level of protection than generally provided. But to that end, there has been legislation introduced, it's House Bill 606, to provide these types of civil liability protections. And it actually did have its first hearing yesterday. You can go online and probably watch it or pull up the testimony, but to quote the sponsor, and that's Representative Diane Grendel, the general immunity component will be applicable to businesses and individuals caused by transmission of a coronavirus infection unless it is established by clear and convincing evidence that the infection was transmitted by reckless or intentional conduct with willful or wanton misconduct. So examples of those covered under the bill would include, but are not limited to, all Ohio businesses, hospitals, healthcare workers, volunteers, grocery stores, churches, delivery drivers, and business employees. So if an individual, a business, or a healthcare provider is acting in good faith and within their purview, unwarranted civil retaliation upon them hopefully would be prevented, and this is what the bill aims to do. Now, there's also an emergency clause that would be included, which would make it enacted immediately upon passage. What we're looking to do basically is to apply the so-called Good Samaritan laws to this pandemic. But I mean, you hit it, Don. I mean, it's going to be a tricky balance because we've got to inspire confidence in our businesses to reopen quickly and without this constant threat of litigation hanging over them. But we also need to build back consumer confidence by ensuring a safe and healthy environment for the employees and for the customers. So it's a work in progress, but I do think that there's political will and the votes there to pass it. It's just going to be a question as to the level of standards that are being applied and really whether or not it's going to be scaled back to only certain commercial entities.
Skip, are you letting your tenants make their own decisions as far as once we hear from the governor and the state allowing companies to reopen depending on the industry that they're in, or are you working with them hand in glove on their reopening plans and making sure that for your own liability reasons that they're committed to the safeguards and the protections and the proper policies to reopen the right way?
Well, we are talking to them and we're trying to work with them, but the reality is we're the real estate guys. We're
losing Skip a little bit here.
Oh,
okay.
Can you hear me? You got me? So I was saying,
good.
Okay, good. Basically, I was saying we're trying to work with them and talk to them about being safe and precautions and what the government's suggesting. But of course, this is America, so their tenants don't do what we tell them. They listen to our suggestions and then they do whatever the heck they want. Now we can say, and we do say, look, here's what the governor said. Here's the precautions you're supposed to be taking. We think you should do this or that, but really it's up to them whether they open, whether they take the precautions. It's all up to them. Now everybody I think feels like, yeah, we got to be safe. We need to take these precautions. But if there's a tenant who says, look, this is what I'm doing, we don't have any recourse. We're not there to say, well, we're going to call the police on you. We just say, here's what we think you ought to do, but it's really up to the tenants. And really the tenants are deciding what they want to do and how they want to do it.
Sheila, from a legal perspective, how is Voorhees advising its clients?
We're advising our employers to make sure they have all the safety protocols in place and that they're working properly, to follow CDC recommendations and the orders and all the guidelines. I mean, just to do that and take care of it.
Yeah, we do that, obviously. We can do that internally for ourselves in our companies, our management companies. But when it's a tenant, we can suggest that, but it's really, we tell them to talk to their attorneys and find out, because they could be opening themselves up to liability, but it's hard for us to basically make them do anything.
And our chamber has it's very brief, but there's a 4-part series on returning to work at columbus.org, which is open to all of you to go in. And we've been very, very selective in vetting the information very carefully that we're getting from our members and also from national organizations and associations. So there is information there. And Rick, any other state changes that the industry should be aware of in regards to all of this, especially, you know, the commercial real estate industry, because it plays such a huge role in all of us going back to work?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, I think there are about 5 different work groups currently up and running. I talked about the torts and immunity one. There's one dealing with telehealth initiatives and surprise medical billing. I'm on 2 other groups. One is dealing with restaurants, bars, fairs, and amusement parks. So what we're doing on that group is looking for ways to help the hospitality industry. You know, what can we codify some of these liquor allowances that were done during the pandemic? You know, what are some things that we can do, you know, for the bars and for the restaurants? I'm also on a different panel that are looking at regulatory and licensing issues. You know, we need all hands on deck in the healthcare sector. You know, so how do we how do we look at scope of practice for different nurses and different healthcare providers out there and take advantage of their talents, you know, as needed now? How do we provide, you know, how do we allow people to do professional development when there's been so much disruption here? You know, how are we going to count some of these virtual meetings as professional development type hour? I mean, there's lots of things along those lines. And then the other work group is dealing with unemployment compensation, just the whole infrastructure and the processes related to that. So, I mean, there's not a specific group necessarily for commercial real estate, but I mean, we're trying to look at this thing holistically, but also trying to be sensitive to the different sectors and come up again with some recovery measures that are sort of carefully calibrated and are going to provide some unique levels of relief to different industries.
That's great. Sheila, let me start. You know, we're at 12:37 and about time to wrap up. Anything else that you think that our great NAIOP members should be really aware of in dealing through this COVID pandemic, and especially as we all prepare to return to the workplace? We've all been working, but now we're going to return to our places of work. Sheila?
Yep, I would mention what we mentioned at the outset, that this environment's constantly changing and that everybody should stay on top of things, stay vigilant, keep up on everything. You have things on your website. We have things on the Voorhees website, which are also on the NAIOP website, which are guidance and client alerts and updates. We have a Voorhees every Thursday. We have a call at noon with experts from our COVID-19 task force that are setting forth the status of all these things. So I would expect that everyone should just stay on top of the changes and again, implement all the orders and the safety measures so we hopefully will all get through it together.
Skip, what are you saying to people who, your associates who might call and they may say, you know, I'm really uncomfortable about coming back to the office. How will you deal with that?
Well, we've been dealing with that. And I think Sheila mentioned earlier about, or somebody did, about the daycare. I think Rick did. We're dealing with that today. And so we have some people that have been just effective at home. And you talk about not the need for office. On the sales team, we need to be together. We need that synergy. Where on our appraisal team, they can work from home and it's a lot easier for them to work from home. So I think what I've done kind of is handled them individually. I've got one of the people I work with has young kids. And so I've said, okay, you work from home, come in maybe here and there on a weekend or for a few hours here, a few hours there, get your stuff. She's set up with everything at home, got her double computer and all that. And so each one is really individualized. It's a lot easier for the appraisers to work from home, harder for the salespeople. In our office, I've had people who really want to be back. Even when we shut the office down, I had one person say, well, can I still come in? And so, probably about half of them just want to come in and want to be together. And now we're all staying in our own office. We have hand washes and sanitizers and wipes everywhere. And so, but I am not making people come in. I'm not, if I say, if you're not comfortable, then that's okay. We'll figure a way around it. Fortunately, at our company, it's a family. I've got the great employees. Everybody cares about us like family members. And so nobody's doing anything because they're selfish. They're all, I've got one of our employees is pregnant, who's worried about everything. And so we've let her be a little more removed than some of the other people, just because that's what she wants to do. And so really we tailor it to each person to see what they want to do and then try and work around that.
We have a 28-year-old associate at the chamber who still lives at home. And he's asked if he could come in every day so he can get out of the house. So we understand that. I see Debbie Lee. Rick Carfagna. Go ahead, Debbie.
I had a question that came in a little different way through chat for Skip. Are investors sitting on the sidelines? So it seems like a relevant question.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, some investors are afraid and some are not. And so it seems to me, I'm generalizing, but the more seasoned investors are not as afraid as the younger, less seasoned investors. So I think especially the younger investors who are in this for a few years, 2 to 5 years, they seem to be more scared and more afraid. And I don't know if it's because they have less assets, but I think it's just because they've never seen nobody's seen this, but they haven't seen anything. And so the more seasoned investors are still saying, where am I going to put my money? And with interest rates so low, people are afraid of the stock market. You're not going to get anything out of the bank. So the investors are not staying on the sideline. A big portion of them are saying, where do I put it and when do I put it? And so I have people call me all the time saying, am I seeing any opportunities? Are there any people getting squeezed where we can buy assets? And if Sheila says, it's too early, they're not getting squeezed yet. But there's a lot of investors that are looking to get their money out. And that's local investors, that's individuals, not including the pension funds and the life insurance companies.
Sheila, would you like to?
No, it's the same thing. I think that there's more capital out there, and maybe the more seasoned investors have the capital. It's just whether the opportunities are going to be there. And it's going to be based on what happens with the lenders to see if there's going to be any distressed properties that the investors can get into.
Yeah, but they're going to have to employ it at some point, and the lenders are still lending money. Some of them say, well, I'm so busy with the PPP, but we've got a project. I've got 5 proposals on my desk to start an apartment project, and people are chasing me saying, we want to get the money out. So the banks still want to make loans. And so you're going to have to get that money out at some point.
I'd like to thank all of you very much. Rick Carfagna is from our Ohio House of Representatives, representing District 68. Sheila Nolan Gartland is a partner at Vorey, Sater, Seymour & Peace. And of course, she is a commercial real estate attorney and has other specialties. And of course, we all know Skip Weiler from the Robert Weiler Company. Thank you so much. Scott, are you going to take us home a little bit here, our former president of NAIOP Central Ohio?
Just very briefly, Don, thank you for doing a fantastic job moderating. We knew you'd be fantastic, and thanks for all the panelists. Thanks everyone for joining us. Check out centralohionaiop.org for upcoming, and your emails for upcoming presentations. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.